Good morning, although it feels like afternoon to me. Welcome to Shattering Myths, a program devoted to those of you who are open to the realization that all of the world's religious, political, economic, and military institutions are counterproductive and corrupt. I am Yada. Our number, if you'd like to join us anytime over the next 2 hours, is 877-300-7645. The reason I say that is I got the opportunity this morning to spend a couple of hours with one of my favorite talk radio hosts. His name is Louis Free. His show is called Brain Food from the Heartland. Louis is ethnically Jewish. He is a open-minded, rational, and courageous thinker. And I've known Louis for a better part of the last 14 or 15 years. And once a month or so, I have the honor of being his guest on his show. And we had a very lively conversation over the last couple of hours. For those who would like to listen to it, I think Louis has archives available of all of his programs. So we covered a wide swath of territory this morning, as we typically do, from the negatives of Islam to the positives of the covenant and Yahowah. Times of laughing, times of gut-wrenching issues. But if you go and Google Louis Free or Brain Food from the Heartland, either one of those two will probably take you to Louis' site and to his archives. One of the things I wanted to talk about this morning is Palmyra. I remember we had a brief discussion yesterday as to the second temple that was attempted to be destroyed, and it was a partial destruction by the Islamic State in Palmyra. The second temple was the temple to Bel. Well, the first temple they destroyed was the temple to Baal Shamin, which is the Lord of the Heaven. The Temple of Bel is just the temple to the Lord. And, well, I thought all that was interesting, that in a Roman province, which was essentially a Greek province, which was essentially a Persian province, which is essentially a Babylonian derivative, that you would have these temples and a city devoted to them that crossed all through these cultures. At the epicenter of Yahweh's Daniel prophecies. And that this all occurred contemporaneously with Yosha's fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim. The temple to Bel was completed in 32 CE. And we also have sightings of two of Yahweh's least favorite people. The last one putting his mark on Palmyra was Hadrian, the very person who lured Jews back into Jerusalem to rebuild the temple and the city that Rome had destroyed in 70 CE. And come to find out that his plan was to rename Jerusalem for himself and to establish a temple to himself on the Temple Mount. And that the purpose of luring Jews back was to kill them and to obliterate all traces of Yahudah and their Torah. And so in that milieu, particularly at this time, is when Palmyra is reaching its zenith, its crescendo in history and influence. So I thought we would talk a little bit about Palmyra, the timing of the place, what it represented, and the intersection between these religions. But to put it in proper perspective, the most widespread, the most broad-based presentation of relevant human history during this time was presented not by a historian, but by a prophet. Because just as the scene of the fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim, and Shavuah in 33 CE, year 4000 Yosha's fulfillment of the first four, Moed Mikre, along with the set-apart spirit, is that the by far the most complete and detailed, the most comprehensive and broad-based accounts of what occurred were presented 1,000 years before these events actually manifested themselves in the normal flow of history. The same thing is true with this transition from Babylon to Assyria to Greece to Rome to the Roman Catholic Church. It was all presented through the prophet Daniel via Yahowah's messenger Gabriel in the 6th century BCE, many, many centuries before these events would play out before our eyes. And what Yahowah says is that man's nation building, their religious establishments, their political mantras, their military pursuits, that collectively these human institutions, from his perspective, were beasts, savage and vicious, destructive. And that the beasts would flow from one to another. They would simply, one would die and the other would rise on its carcass, and by a different name, do the same thing. And it begins with Babylon. And Babylon is based on the Hebrew word Babel. And Babel means to confuse in Hebrew. But think of Babel, B-E-L. It's the confusion of the Lord. Baal and Baal are the same word in Hebrew. It means the Lord. It's the Lord's confusion. Who is the author of confusion in our world? Hasatan. Babel is Satan's means to confuse. And this first beast, according to Yahowah, was based upon the Lord's confusion being perpetrated on people, politically, religiously, and militarily. A vicious beast of Babel. And their god, Bel, which is the Lord, Satan. And how this then god and this political and religious regime were conquered by the Medes, the Assyrians, and how collectively they passed on all of their bad traits of these institutions until the point that they were conquered. They became the Persians, and they were conquered by Alexander the Great and the Macedonians, and how Alexander then came to embody all things Persian. And the Persians came to embody all things Babylonian. In fact, the Persian and Babylonian cultures are just an extension, an evolution of one to the other. Same place, same people, same religion, same behavior, same institutions. And how, as Alexander pursued Darius and the Persians, he came to embrace most everything Persian, and yet still applying some of the Greek influence, particularly Gnosticism, and the Greek names for those Babylonian gods upon his victims. And we then see this conflict between the Greeks and the Persians, and even before that, the Median Persians and the Babylonians. The battles that Yahowah depicts them fighting, and the transitions between one culture to the next, one nation state to the next, are all centered right around Palmyra. It is where the beasts fought to have one beast devour the other. And so the battles that were ultimately fought between Persia and Babylon, that weakened Babylon so that Persia would be able to claim victory, took place right around Palmyra. And then the same is true with Alexander, as he marched in conquest of his great quest, his white whale, Darius, and spent much of his life in central Syria in pursuit as he would go through Turkey and then down through Syria, ultimately to Egypt. And it's a place of conflict between the two. And then we find that as Greece and gives way to Rome, as Rome conquers Greece, that Rome would establish cultural centers in these various areas, and that the religion, the politics of the place would transition from one to another. And then finally in Palmyra is under Roman and Greek influence with huge Persian influence, this melting pot of these three beasts. It is from this environment that Christianity would emerge. Most of Paul's letters that ultimately were coalesced by Marcion and published by Marcion to create Christianity. The oldest manuscripts, apart from those that have been unearthed in Egypt, but the manuscripts that date to the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th century that are the most prevalent in Christendom. This is where they were all copied and comprised and found, is right in the heart of Syria. This is about 125 miles north by northeast of Damascus. So I thought you'd like to know some of the history of this place, particularly as Bel, the Lord of Confusion, and Baal Shamin, the Lord of the Heavens, was worshipped in this place, and how the influence of this place was spread throughout the Roman Empire and ultimately into Roman Catholicism. You see, we begin with, and I'm going to read some from Wikipedia to provide some background. It says the city's wealth, which was primarily from trading between civilizations, the Babylonians and the Greeks, the Babylonians and the Egyptians, the Persians and the Egyptians, the Persians and the Greeks, and all of that, that the production of those civilizations went through Palmyra, because there was a spring there and roads that went through there. And so that wealth enabled them to construct monumental, political, and religious edifices. So the city's wealth enabled the construction of monumental projects. By the 3rd century CE, the first century is 0 to 99, the second 100 to 199. The 3rd century would be from 200 to 299. So, putting this in perspective, this is the city is developing and reaching its zenith at the very time that Rome was transitioning from the Empire of Rome, the vicious beast that it was, and according to Yahowah, that was the second worst of all beasts, into the religious empire of Rome, which is the most vicious of all beasts. This is occurring during that period of transition. And it says the city was a prosperous regional center. Before 273, that's when it was destroyed, attacked by the Romans, not completely destroyed, but attacked by the Romans. And then thereafter, in 1400, it was sacked and essentially destroyed by Muslims that were Mongolian Turks. At the time, the Mongols had embraced Islam and became especially vicious, and then merged and became the great empire that emerged out of Turkey, that was essentially controlled by the Mongols under Islam. It enjoyed great autonomy for much of its existence because it was always in that no man's land. It was too far for Egypt to control, too far away for Greece to really control, but not too far for Egypt to influence, not too far for Greece to influence. It was too far from Babylon for the Babylonians or for the Persians to not to influence, but to incorporate into their empire. So it was this kind of no man's land in central Syria that was, too far away from each of these countries for them to control, but yet not too far away for them to influence it, because they were the roads met between these various civilizations: Egypt, Greece, later Rome, Babylon, later Persia. Then Palmyra took on the chameleon. In other words, it was to each of them reflecting what those who were bringing them goods represented, and then reflected what those who were buying those goods represented. So it became a mirror for institutionalized humanity at this transitional time in human history. The Roman province, it was attached to the Roman province of Syria. It's interesting, there was the Roman province of Syria, still called Syria, and there was the Roman province of Yahowah, now called Palestine. So why did they give up on the name for Yahowah? They still call there's the Roman province of Egypt. They still use the term Egypt. The Roman province of Syria, the Roman province of Yahowah. Only one of those names, of course, was changed. It was heavily influenced by the Greek city-state model. So even when it was controlled for this brief time by the Romans, it still represented Greece. It was Grecian ideals that were reflected in the cities, particularly during the first 2 centuries CE. The cities was governed by a senate, which was responsible for public works and the military. After becoming a colony of Rome in the 3rd century, Palmyra was incorporated into Roman governing institutions before adopting finally a monarchical system in 260 that led to its demise, because the king of Palmyra decided that he wanted, as a guppy, he wanted to swallow a whale, and he took on Persia, lost. The Palmyrans were a mix of Amorites and Amorenes with a Jewish minority. The city's social structure was tribal, as it has remained, and its inhabitants even actually spoke a Palmyrene, which was a dialect of Aramaic. Greek was used for diplomatic purposes. The culture was influenced primarily by Greece, and therefore the Grecian gods, and Rome as it relates to its politics, but also by Persia. So it is the ultimate crucible where the Greco-Roman world interacted and interchanged religious and political ideas with Babylon. So even Wikipedia acknowledges that the culture, that would mean the religion and the politics, the societal traditions of Palmyra were influenced by Greece, Rome, and Persia. Greece, Rome, and Persia. We're talking about the 3 beasts. This is the epicenter of the 3 beasts that Yahowah describes in Daniel. And Babylon became Persia. Greece essentially became Rome. And Rome became the Roman Catholic Church. This is a place that is at the crosshairs of the beasts of Daniel. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Ultimately, from which the final, the 5th and the worst of the beasts emerges, the Roman Catholic Church. It produced distinctive art and architecture. Actually not, it wasn't distinctive at all. Nor did it produce distinct religions. It plagiarized everything. The architecture was Grecian, which the Romans copied. The gods were Babylonians, which the Greeks and Romans copied. So this would be wrong. They were influenced by the three beasts, but they themselves were just an amalgamation of those beasts. It says the city's inhabitants worship local deities, Mesopotamian and Arab gods. That's really not true either, not in terms of the big picture. The two big temples were to whom? Same God, the Lord. Baal and Bel are the same God, same word, Bel, Lord. And it is the principal deity of the Babylonians, of the Persians. Although he operated under a different name, as the principal god of the Greeks, the Romans, and the Roman Catholicism, which now reverted back to the original Babylonian name, the Lord. And so it is the gods of, when they say Mesopotamia, they mean Babylon and Assyria. But with heavy, heavy influence, because it was a place that was most influenced by Greece and Rome secondarily, but Rome, of course, incorporated everything that was Greek. And so it was the Babylonian deities. Were some of the minor deities Arab gods? Certainly. Were some of the minor deities local deities? Probably. But the big temples, which were erected with the Temple of Bel that was just destroyed, was erected, completed in 32 CE. Timing's interesting, isn't it? Palmyra was a minor center under the Byzantines because of it was in that conflict zone, and because of the fact that its king had delusions of grandeur and attacked much larger foes. But also the Umayyads, which were the Muslims that came out of Iran, Iraq, the Abbasids, again Muslims, the Mamluks, which were Mongolian-influenced Turkish Muslims, and their vassals. They converted to Christianity during the 4th century. The reason they converted to Christianity in the 4th century is that Christianity was opposed. And right around 400 CE, Theodosius imposed Christianity. You either were a Christian or you were dead. And then they converted to Islam in the second half of the first millennium, it says here. They would have converted to Islam within 100 years of Muhammad's death, because the same choice was made: convert or die. The Greek languages were replaced, of course, by Arabic. The city was destroyed by the Timurids in 1400. The Timurids were Mongol ethnicity merged with Turk ethnicity under the auspices of Islam. And that's when the city was destroyed. The ruins that were standing until this past week became ruins in 1400, which means at the time that the Byzantines were there, the time that the Muslims, the Umayyads and the Abbasids were there, they had no problems with the temples to the Lord. The initial God of the Quran is the Lord. The first revelation in the Quran, found in the 96th surah, is claimed by the Lord, the very God whom these temples had been erected. During the Hellenistic period, under the Seleucids, between 312 and 64 BCE, Palmyra became a prosperous settlement, owing its allegiance to the Seleucid king. This is, during the period of time after it had been conquered by Alexander the Great, between then and the time that the Macedonian Grecian Empire was conquered by Rome. So this is during the Hellenistic period. Palmyra became a very prosperous settlement. It had its allegiance to all things Greece. In 217 BCE, a force led by a sheik named Zabid Ibel. So this is someone who is promoting Bel as God. Joined the army of Antiochus III in the Battle of Raphia, which ended in a Greek defeat. In the middle of the Hellenistic era, Palmyra, formerly south of the current Wadi, began to expand beyond its northern bank. In the late 2nd century BCE, the tower tombs were built, and then the culture was ultimately absorbed into the Roman Republic in 64 BCE. This is the epicenter, really, of these beasts as they emerged from Babylon into Persia and then transitioned from Greece into Rome. It says here that the temples of Baal Shamin, which is the Lord of the Heavens, and Alat, and the Hellenistic temple began to be built. Alat is one of the three goddesses that Muhammad endorsed in his Quran, where he said that Alat, Manuza, and Luza were the goddesses that act as intermediaries to Allah. So we're dealing with an amalgamation here that ultimately even takes on some realization that one of the goddesses mentioned in the Quran was in fact a pagan deity preceding Islam by many centuries. Hello, Glenn. This is a interesting epicenter of religious and institutional national interaction, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So many questions, so little time. What you talked about these forced conversions?
Yes.
It sort of, one would think that if one was really devoted to one's God and was given a choice between denying one's God and death, like, aren't you really supposed to choose death rather than birth?
You would. Well, if you were convinced that your religion was true, that it could be verified and confirmed, and if you were certain that it was true, as we are about Yahowah and his covenant, because he proves his authorship, then you would absolutely and unequivocally choose death, because it would be the gateway to life.
Well, sure.
But if you recognize that what you had was unprovable and it was a belief system, and somebody else came to you with another unprovable belief system, why wouldn't you choose to maintain your mortal existence and just transition from one fraud to another?
Right. Well, Yosha says, if you deny the poor men, I'll deny you before my Father, right? And what you would sort of think that
But you're making the assumption that they were with Yahowah, understood Yahowah, and made a decision to leave Yahowah for a human pledge of allegiance, but that wasn't the case. They left a pledge of allegiance from one misguided religion to another misguided religion.
Right. Gotcha.
Right.
Now, these Muslims are very iconoclastic. They like to destroy things that, that their religion, because that's going to blow up, Buddhist, ancient Buddhist statues.
But what's pretty interesting, though, Glenn, as it relates to this particular spot, is that for centuries, the temples to the Lord were mosques, because the first God of the Quran is the Lord.
Right.
So before the Islamic State decided to destroy them, both of those temples were used as mosques.
Right, which is ironic. But what's interesting, one would hardly think that Yahowah would have any objection to temples to Bel or Baal being destroyed. So
no,
he doesn't. I'm thinking that Yahowah was really probably not all that offended by this.
No. The reason we're telling the story has nothing to do with the world's outrage against the destruction of historical artifacts, but instead the lessons that we can learn, particularly as we look at Daniel's inspired condemnation of the progression of institutionalized beast, the beast that is Babel, the confusion of the Lord, to the beast that is Persia, to the beast that is Greece, to the beast that is Rome, to the beast that is the Roman Catholic Church. And we see the integration of all of these things in a city that celebrates its affinity to the Lord at the intersection of these civilizations. So I think it's a fascinating learning experience.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's just it's beastly confusion.
Oh, yeah. but I'm not bemoaning the destruction of the temples, as you probably know.
No. I didn't mean to say you were.
Yes.
But Bob, and of course, Babel from the Akkadian means gate of God. So
right.
their mind, they were building a stairway to heaven.
Correct.
You see the spiral staircase to heaven.
Right. Exactly. By way of the Lord. And as the Lord ascending as the Lord of the heavens, if you're the Lord of the heavens, who are you above? Yahowah. There's only, if you're going to be the Lord of the heavens, you are above Yahowah. It means that from your perspective, you control him. Only Satan is egotistical enough to make that claim. It is interesting that Palmyra saw that its most extensive construction during the 1st century CE, including the city's first walled fortifications and the Temple of Baal, which was completed and dedicated in 32 CE. In 129 CE, Palmyra was visited by the greatest villain perhaps the earth has ever known, Hadrian, who named the city after himself, Hadrian Palmyra. Hadrian promoted Hellenism. He promoted the cult of Dionysus. Hadrian was vehemently opposed to the Torah and to Yahowah and to Israelites, and devoted as an initiate and a leader within the Dionysian cult. He is the very foundation of what Pauline Christianity would become based. And the city was at its zenith when Hadrian modeled it as an expression of the Greek religion, with the theaters and colonnades and temples. And guess the temple that Hadrian had built there was the temple to Nabu. Now, Nabu is not somebody that you run across every day, but you know what Nabu represents in the native language? He is the god. First of all, he's the son of God, the son of Marduk, and the grandson of Ea, from which Mother Earth is named. The NB root means to name, to announce, to call, and to proclaim. He is the god not only of wisdom in these pagan religions, but the god of writing. Boy, he is a perfect replacement for Yosha, the Word made flesh, who came to announce, to name, and to proclaim, to invite us to Yahowah. He is the counterfeit for the Torah. Fascinating, huh? Well, Glenn, it is.
I'm listening.
Yeah, it is an interesting place, Palmyra. So much to learn. At 3 temples, one to Bel, which was the Babylonian god. Oh, and by the way, the other thing that's interesting here is I mentioned the 3 beasts, which became ultimately the 5th beast, the Roman Catholic Church. But I mentioned that how this grew out of Persia, and then from Persia to Greece, and from Greece to Rome, and from Rome to the Roman Catholic Church. Nabu, the temple that Hadrian built there, he was an Assyrian god. He was a Babylonian Assyrian god. So it, in fact, is the intersection of all 5 beasts.
Wow. Well, certainly the Roman Catholic Church has behaved in a beastly manner at times in history.
Yes.
But I don't know. It seems to me there's a beast nowadays that, destroys things, stomps the residue, and they rise not up again, and it's not the Roman Catholic Church.
What do you think the greatest beast is today?
Well, I think it's the globalists, overall. I really, sort of think that they're ultimately Luciferians at the top of the global hierarchy who infiltrate any and all ideology.
And you don't think that the Roman Catholic Church is devoted to Lord Baal, the Lord?
It's certainly one of the players.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's I personally think that the destruction of the world is an integration of the most prominent forces in the world today. And one of them is socialist secular humanism, the elitists that you speak of, the globalists that you speak of, socialist secular humanism. But I think Christianity, particularly in its most popular cult forms, Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, will be an equal player. And I think that they will also create an alliance with and incorporate the vicious and deadly control mechanisms, the fear that's associated with Islam. And that the destruction of the world is a combination of forces, of the elitist, of socialist secular humanism, using and embracing many of the Pauline Christian deceptions and using the viciousness and the jihad nature of Islam.
Right. And at the top, I think it's sociopathic oligarchs devoted to, Lucifer.
Clearly, the Toralist one is, we're told specifically, I mean, you don't even have to ponder a position on this. The Toralist one is absolutely possessed by Hasatan, by one of Hasatan's demons, just as was Paul, just as was Muhammad. And if I were guessing, I would say, as was Adam Weishaupt, that the founder of socialist secular humanism. I think they all share that as a common trait. We know that most of them